I found it on Facebook and because I heard it were the Wyoming Arts Alliance. So I knew this had been and then I'm sharing it on my Facebook.
That's better. Joanne, ready for it. Thanks, Joanne.
On the house.
There's the big house.
It's okay. You want to move? You push it back down. It'd be weird. You want people on the front, right? Where did our?
You can't.
No, it's
What
just
did you
like,
say back there?
just like church, everybody has to sit in the back.
Okay.
Did their microphone get turned on okay?
Whoa, it's hot.
Hot mic. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Andrew Schneider. I'm the Director of Operations for the Wyoming Arts Alliance. This year, we celebrated our 40th anniversary. Our mission is really all about improving the climate for arts and culture in the state. This panel came about when Joanne and I were down at the session in Cheyenne, and we noticed that everyone in the Capitol was talking about this book, The Paradox of Plenty. And if you know anything about the session, you know that there's a lot of time for reading books. But the first thing we did in March when the session was over was drive through it, and Governor Freudenthal was gracious enough to agree to come to Casper and do an event and talk with us tonight. For those who are not able to make it, we'll post the video on our website, and you can chime in on the comments on Facebook tonight if you've got thoughts. The format for this evening is really just to take an hour. We're going to start talking about the book, and then we have a really distinguished panel of folks who are in what I would call, who touch the creative industries, although they all probably think about it vastly differently. But from the Wyoming Arts Alliance standpoint, these are our allies in industry and in the economy. And as you can probably tell demographically, these are folks who are going to be leaders in our economy for quite some time. So I think their opinion really carries some weight. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. We want to thank Backwards for sending us an old-fashioned cocktail tonight. That was really nice of them. I want to thank Occasions by Corey. Of course, we thank Joanne for sponsoring that to make it all happen. We want to thank Allison Malushnik and the team here at the Nicolaitan for hosting us, giving us all the incredible production value for this panel this evening. Please stick around afterwards and continue this conversation. Corey will be here with the bar and the food for until about 8 o'clock. If you need a restroom, you're just going to go straight through the lobby, look for the black curtain in the coat room, and hang a right before you get there. I think that covers all of the housekeeping.
Telephones.
Anything else? If you could silence your phones, that'd be appreciated. Just go back to like it was 1990 and before the things even existed. I'll do my intro, and then I'll turn it over to Joanne, who's going to help moderate tonight, and then we'll just start intros down the line. But I was born in Casper, 38. I'm a fourth-generation Wyomingite. I always joke that the ag generation gave birth to engineers, and the engineers gave birth to artists, and the artists gave birth to me, which is why I'm an arts advocate. So that's kind of how we wound up here tonight. But my career took me all over the country. My mom's career took her all over the world from Wyoming because there weren't a lot of opportunities here. And when COVID hit, there was this, turns out there was actually a huge creative zeitgeist in the state. And it was really exciting for me to learn about that and to come back. So after a long time working to get back in Wyoming, I was really glad to come back to my hometown and to be here doing this work across the state. I think that's all the relevant facts about myself. And without further ado, my esteemed colleague at the podium, Joanne True.
Well, thanks to Andrew and the NIC and the Wyoming Arts Alliance. Really appreciate being invited to participate with this. We've got a really great panel. Quick few words about me. Not born in Wyoming, but married into a multi-generational family. I actually have 2 fourth-generation kiddos here. You know, worked in oil and gas for 20 years, was a petroleum geologist, left full-time a couple of years ago. really important to grow the state, want my children to settle here should they choose. I always quote Andrew when I talk about this, but Wyoming is one of those places where you don't go if it's easy. You don't go because it's easy, right? Things are not ready-made. It requires all of us to pick up, whatever it is we're doing, work hard and work together and grow the state into what we want it to look like. So anyway, thanks again for coming. The first introduction we've got, we're going to go down the panel here, and then we'll have the governor introduce himself last. But first up, we've got Jared Stack. On my notes, I have entrepreneurship, multi-generational family. What else is there to say? So I'll let you take it from there.
Can I just let you go with me? Great. Yeah, my name is Jared Stack. I feel a little out over my skis here. If you would have told me like 5 years ago I was going to be on a panel at the Arts Alliance, I would have told you, that is not on your bingo card. I can bear the spell arts, but truthfully, I'm really happy to be here. My background, I guess maybe I'll try to walk into why I'm actually here too. So yeah, I am a 5th generation Wyomingite. My great-great-grandfather homesteaded out over by Lander, and my family's been here ever since. Then I've been a tech entrepreneur. I started my career actually in Austin, Texas. I lived in Boulder for a while, and I came back and started a company called Firehole Technologies in Laramie. That's been a while ago now. I feel a little old when I say that, but that was about 15 years ago. We sold that to a company called Autodesk, so we've ever used AutoCAD before. They acquired us in 2013, and since then my passion's really been entrepreneurship in Wyoming and building a cooler place to live. So I've had a couple tech companies since then. I'm currently the CEO of a company called FlowState. We make artificial intelligence software for the oil and gas industry. I also have a handful of other kind of side projects. I'm one of the owners of Frontier Brewery downtown. I have a co-working space called the Durlocker in Laramie. I'm a part owner in the tennis club over here on the other side of town, and a whole bunch of other things. I also, after I sold my company, I started something called Breakthrough 307, which is a small venture capital fund where we invest in Wyoming tech startups. So all of that kind of put together puts me, I have an appreciation for what we're doing in Wyoming and how we're trying to kind of build that forward. Another thing that probably puts me directly here, I was on Governor Meade's Endow Council for 3.5 years or so, however long that thing lived. And I was the chairman of the Knowledge, Creative, and Arts Committee, so I got a new appreciation for the arts economy and what that does and how that really builds what we're trying to do in Wyoming.
Great, thanks, Jared. Erin Galloway from Campbell County. She and her husband Mike are first generation ranchers on a multi-generational ranch. They're doing some innovative things around ag business, ag tourism, and really excited to learn about what you're doing up in Campbell County.
Thanks, Joanne. I am a Gillette native, born and graduated high school in Gillette. Left, came back. In 2008, my husband and I got married, and a few months after being married, I was like, hey, you want to go feed some cows for a winter on my stepdad's ranch? And he agreed, and we never left. In 2017, my stepfather actually passed in 2012. The ranch is very heavily dependent on minerals. That's where my stepfather accumulated his wealth and his land and ranching operation. In 2012, he passed. In 2017, Mike made a 4.5-minute video on YouTube about feeding the cows. And Mike had a previous career in broadcast, and so he was really, really good at explaining to people who didn't know anything about ranching how to put it into perspective. And from there, our social media careers were born before we knew what social media careers were. And so we've been on YouTube since 2017, making ranching and farming content. We also have a direct-to-consumer ranch operation now. We're no longer a traditional cow-calf, we're 100% direct-to-consumer. So everything that's born and raised on the ranch stays on the ranch and then goes to our customer base. We now ship meat products and ranch products all throughout the United States, and things like t-shirts and other YouTuber things like merchandise all over the world. We have a farm store on the ranch. We do a lot of agritourism in the summertime. So we do harvest hosts, we have a small RV park, we have an Airbnb. And in 2019, I founded a nonprofit called Edible Prairie Project, and we use local food as a local solution to hunger. So we do a variety of things like a veggie basket program that's free if you're on federal food assistance programs. and it's local produce and protein, and we do a weekend food bake program in the summertime for kids. And I met Joanne in the food insecurity space several years ago, and that's how I ended up here. And I think that's everything.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. It is my privilege and honor to introduce Sean Parker. And as a creative industries guy who's worked in film and television, started my career in theater, I have been a huge fan of Sean's work with Visit Sheridan, now with the Tourism Board, and I'll let you get into all of that. But when you think about luminaries in film media and digital arts and what is going on in the northeast part of the state and how communities are leveraging arts and culture to diversify the economy, if you don't know about Sean Parker, shame on you. Take it away, Sean.
I mean, that's good, we'll just pass it. Now I'll just make you mad. I'm a recovering Canadian and a journalist by trade. So, before you boo, I do love Wyoming very deeply. My wife's family's been here for over 100 years, and I didn't know what country it was in. We met while I was on assignment in South Korea. She was teaching English over there. I had gone over to cover North Korea, of all places, and as a Canadian, I was one of the few journalists at the time that could get in, and thought that was pretty good fun. So when she said, hey, do you want to head back home and visit my family? I said, sure, Wyoming sounds pretty great. And I was stunned by it. You know, we thought maybe we'd spend a weekend or a month, you know, that turned into a week, and that turned into a month. And we said, you know, maybe we'll go back to Toronto, where I'm from. And we didn't, and then maybe we'll go back to LA, because that's where a lot of my work was at the time with film stuff, and we didn't, and maybe we'll go to New York, and that was 13 years ago, and I'm still waiting to leave. So, you know, I kid about it all the time that you know, I'm just waiting for my next assignment to come along, but I think, you know, I'll be carried out of this place in a box. I truly do love Wyoming for all its potential and all that it's provided for me and my family. Heavily invested in the arts, as Andrew said. Journalist by trade, but also became a photographer. Started that in about 2006 after my Hollywood career crashed and burned pretty spectacularly, actually. There's a good story about that out there. Yeah, traveled to 85 different countries on assignment. Was very fortunate to work for some little outlets like National Geographic and GQ, and just some really great experiences. But, you know, I think one of the reasons that they hired me in this job, in this role in 2015, was that I mean it when I say I can't think of a better place in the world to visit and live than Sheridan, Wyoming. And I've stood by that. And I think, you know, when I saw an opportunity to get my first real job at 35 years old, I said to my wife, you know, I think I can bring in an outside perspective on how to coalesce the community to see Sheridan in the way that it deserves to be seen. It's a really special place. There's so much going for it, but at the time, you know, was it a mountain town with a cowboy problem or a cowboy town with an arts problem? It was really at odds with itself over what it could be and wanted to be. And I think, you know, not because of us, but I think we've pointed the community in the right direction in the last 10 years, that it's a place where we have good companies moving in, we have great jobs for people, we have a thriving arts economy that we've always had, but now we're all behind it together, pointing in the right direction. So as long as they'll keep me, I'll stay there. But I'm proud of Sheridan, as you can probably tell, and I love Wyoming.
Thank you, Sean. Next on our panel is someone who, much like myself, I do about 600 miles a month traveling the state and meeting arts and culture folks all over. And Kayla has a similar portfolio, really covers almost the entire state, if not the entire state. And I'm really excited to have that Main Street local economy perspective represented tonight, to not just think about the economy, but also the quality of life. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a virtual shout out to Trey Sherwood, who was planning to join us tonight, but when the most Wyoming thing ever happened and there was a horse buying related accident in her staff, we were able to, I'm gonna say it, sorry Trey, trade up to Kayla.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I guess I am a bit of an aspiring road warrior, whether it's intentional or not. But yes, my name is Kayla Clare, and unlike these folks to my left, I actually work at the state level So I oversee the Main Street program, which is a program of the Wyoming Business Council, but it means I get to work almost in every corner of the state, both with communities that already have a Main Street program established in their downtown, or that are just interested in learning more about revitalizing their community and their downtown and bringing people together. So I am a Wyoming native, since we're in that theme. Born and raised in Goshen County, just outside of Torrington, where my parents still live on a farm. So I come from that agricultural background and wound up in Cheyenne about 10 years ago to come to college. And once I was done with college, I ended up in a role with the Wyoming Business Council, not in Main Street, but in various roles in data and research, and somehow landed here tonight on this panel. And so that was a certain turn of events, but I am grateful to be here, to be working with communities all over the state, seeing all the scenery and meeting wonderful people that are passionate about their communities and seeing them grow and be sustained, and working with all sorts of industries and whatnot. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Kayla. And now I'd like to introduce Governor Freudenthal. He's going to give an introduction, as well as, if you do not have a copy of this and have not read it yet, please do so. It's great. As Andrew said, when it first came out, we were at the legislature and we're talking about it with everyone else about, appreciating the candor and the honesty that he is known for in print. And also, I have to say that the interview on Wyoming PBS sums up your book nicely. That was beautifully done. So I'll let you go ahead and do an introduction, as well as talk about the whys of why you wrote this, or however you'd like to introduce the book.
Well, I haven't seen the Wyoming PBS things, so I hope they're good.
Trust
us.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Thermopolis. The delightful part about this panel is that it's not just a bunch of old guys like me. The future is much more in their hands to undo some of the wreckage that we've created. And I hope you do, because this is a great place. We're driving up, as most of you know, we've had plenty of rain. It was green, there's a bit of fog, it's like being in Ireland. And I know it's not gonna last, but I intend to enjoy that. It is just so wonderfully green this year. It's really a nice drive. I came to write this book. I did the research during COVID as a result of a conversation with a businessman friend of mine who was inside of our little pod, who wanted to know about how we get to be so dependent on minerals. And I, of course, offered my standard flip answer. It was the severance tax in 1969. Upon reflection, which we had a lot of time to reflect during COVID, that was a bit of a flip answer. So I thought, I'm gonna go find out. And my legal work kept going, but we didn't go out a lot. So what do you do in the evenings and on the weekends? Well, you go through the Casper Star archives, you read every book about Wyoming you can find, you tap everybody you know who has any knowledge, notably Don Richards at LSO. He knows where documents are stored and hidden, as well as anybody I know in Wyoming. And the state law library, or the state libraries, are really helpful. I want to quickly outline this because I really want to hear from the rest of the panel. The paradox of plenty is an economic concept which was devised to essentially analyze development in third world countries in which there was a massive influx of capital in order to extract the product, be it gold, minerals, in some cases fruits and vegetables, for export and processing outside the boundaries of the particular country. I struggled with whether to use that, but I was an economics major, and I was familiar with how it worked. And my thought was, nobody likes the idea of comparing the evolution of Wyoming's economy to a third world country, but we really do fit most of the elements of paradox of plenty, with one exception. So here's how it starts. As you know, Wyoming was largely It was largely agriculture, large-scale ranching. Everybody's familiar with the blizzard of '83 or '84, whatever it was, that burned out all of the Scotch and English folks who had been here underwriting capital for cattle grazing. So the only thing that remained really was coal production. Wyoming never benefited the way Colorado did from the discovery of massive reserves of gold and silver and kinds of things that really spurred much of their early development. That wasn't here. The major consumer of coal was the railroads, the Union Pacific Railroad. Wyoming became a territory in 1869, that's a little before you guys. But didn't become a state until 1889. In the intervening period, they were governed by a series of politically appointed governors from various states around the country who happened to be friends with whoever the sitting president was. And by and large, they were a disaster. So what evolved was a very strong county-based system. And at that point, we had 6 counties, which went from border to border. And oddly enough, we're all centered along the UP Strip. And the UP Strip, those communities are defined by how far a railroad, how far the train could run without having to restock with coal or water. And that's why those communities are where they are. The Union Pacific wanted the capital to be in Cheyenne, so oddly enough it is. When it was originally incorporated, it was in the Dakota territories. It was not, Wyoming didn't even exist. So what happened then is they go to the Constitutional Convention, and if you look at the way the Constitution is structured, the unit of government that was intended to be strongest were its counties. They're allowed 12 mills of taxation. Cities are allowed 8, and the state is allowed 4 under the Constitution. Then they had serious debt limitations because you have to remember at that time, there were a lot of railroad bonds that went bad, a lot of canal bonds that went bad in that period of history in the United States. So they put debt limitations on. Interestingly enough, the state's debt limitation is the most strict. And counties, in addition to the 12 mills, imposed a $2 tax on every adult between the ages of 21 and 50, which tells you life expectancy was a little shorter at that time. But the structure was one where they were really suspicious about state government and that they wanted the power to be decentralized. Now, the taxing scheme is one that was premised on the idea that the citizens should pay for the services they get. There's no free lunch. And so what they structured was a property tax system, which taxed personal property, everything from libraries to your watch, whether you had if you had a gas stove, you paid more taxes than the person who had a wood-burning stove. They listed out all of the livestock, right down to turkeys. I mean, they went cattle, pigs, and the whole, you look at those old tax rolls, and it's pretty amazing. But the proposition was, we the citizens should pay for what we get. The theory being that if we're paying, we're going to be a lot more interested in how it's spent. So that was embodied in the Constitution and was meant to survive. Overseeing the system was a board consisting of the state elected state auditor, state treasurer, and secretary of state. And so we became a state in '89. About 1900, coal production was going up, and you could see kind of the beginnings of some oil development, which really took hold later, really around Casper with the Salt Creek field. And everything was valued at 100% of fair market value, whether it was your house, your watch, or the minerals. And that was consistent with the idea you pay for what you get, and you're going to be taxed in accordance with the value. So about 1900, and it's hard to find exactly where this started, they began to devalue in terms of taxes applied, the tax value, everything except minerals. Minerals remained at 100% of fair market value. Meanwhile, everything else went down. Whether it was livestock or whether it was my house or the rest of it, the percentage of fair market value subject to tax declined. Now you gotta remember this had two effects on local governments. One is it reduced their income, but they were limited in terms of how many mills they could impose, and it reduced their ability to issue debt for everything except water. There was an exception for securing water supplies and a limited exception for providing sewage to cities. But what it did was if your assessed valuation goes down, that is the amount of fair market value that's subject to tax, when it goes down, your ability to issue bonds also goes down. So if it goes down by 50%, you can only issue 50% of the bonds you could if it was at fair market value. So we go marching along through the state's history. And I mean, there's lots of interesting anecdotes, none of which we have time for, but so we get to the Depression. Depression hit Wyoming earlier than most of the rest of the country because of ag prices and some problems that were peculiar to Wyoming by virtue of our remoteness. So the Depression was well underway, and you end up with the state wanting federal assistance, which we got a lot of. You gotta know that 1 in 5 people were on the welfare rolls in Wyoming even before the Depression hit. And so it was, and the welfare rolls at that time were funded by the county. They were not funded by the state. So then you end up with a circumstance where two things collided. You had three things. One, you had the ag community complaining that they were bearing too much of the cost because they were being taxed on their livestock and the rest of it. You had a general decline in just economic activity in the state. And then the third thing was that the federal government was saying, if you want to continue to get aid, you better come up with some match money, a familiar song. And so there was this election, a guy named Miller became governor, and he got elected on, I'm gonna cut taxes, I'm gonna lower gasoline prices. Now, I don't know how he was gonna do that exactly, but he made good on that promise. In those years, it was a 2-year term. And so he ran on re-election on the basis of promises made, promises kept, and then turned around and said, look, we gotta have more revenue. And there was a really interesting kind of argument about whether it was gonna be an income tax or more property tax, or they settled on the sales tax. And they settled on the sales tax, even though they knew it was regressive. By regressive, it falls most heavily on lower income people who spend a larger percentage of their wealth on the basic necessities of life. But the argument was made, well, you know, poor people don't pay real estate taxes, so it's okay. So that's where the sales tax came from. And it was passed as an emergency measure, which Mr. Walters can agree is the best way to get something passed, is to say it's an emergency measure and it's going to go away. It didn't go away. Now, prior to the passage of the sales tax, the mill levy imposed by the state, that is the percentage of tax that they were imposing, ranged from 4 to 5 or 6 mills. After the sales tax passed, it only exceeded 2 mills one time in the next 34 years. So the other thing that happened this time period was the passage of the Federal Mineral Leasing Act, which then gave the state a share of the mineral royalties captured by the feds. Feds were capturing all the royalties, 37.5% came to the state of origin where the minerals were developed. 12.5% went to the federal government, and the rest of it went to the Bureau of Reclamation to build water projects in all of the western states. So that added to the coffers. And you had some oil development that was coming on, and it was coming on pretty strong relative to what it had been. So we continued this, well, let me say this, at the time we passed the sales tax, about 35% of the fair market value of everybody's property was no longer being taxed. So that pattern of taking away the tax base continued after the sales tax passed on everything but minerals. Minerals were still assessed at 100%. The reason they could underwrite the reduction of taxes on everybody else was minerals, oil and gas, coal, bentonite hadn't quite showed up. We knew it was there, we knew trona was there. Those were growing industries in Wyoming. So they just shouldered the burden. So what we essentially did is we transferred wealth from the mineral sector to the citizens by virtue of tax relief. So that goes on real happy, and there were a number of attempts to impose a severance tax, notably in the Constitutional Convention and another constitutional amendment in 1920. So that goes on, and we continue to erode the tax base. So in 1966, Governor Hathaway went, I always forget the name of the guy in Casper. But anyway, the gist of that election was the Democrat from Casper ran on the platform of Wyoming wealth for Wyoming people. Right? And he proposed 1.5% in the permanent fund and 1.5% severance tax on all minerals to be placed for operating expenses. Hathaway ran against that, disavowed, excoriated him over the severance tax. And then there was an industrial committee, kind of like modern day black money. Nobody knows where it came from, but they ran all of these ads about Wilkerson will destroy jobs, and he'll destroy the Wyoming economy, vote Hathaway. Hathaway wins big. So his first session, 67, he raised a number of smaller taxes. Come 69, Hathaway had a pretty clear vision of what he thought Wyoming could be, but it needed to be paid for. And so he looked around and said, I don't know if they're going to buy this they were increasing tobacco taxes, gas taxes, and those. So he comes out in support of, he wouldn't use the word severance tax. In his message, he calls it a special tax on the extractive industry, which everybody recognized as a severance tax. So it passes in 69. And in 69, that funded the stuff he wanted to do. Now, starting in 69, there has never been the state property tax imposed since 69. So the first sort of run out of the box was in the severance tax passed, state had plenty of money, and so they stopped doing the property tax. So Hathaway decided that as long as we got lots of money, we're gonna go nuts on tax relief. And we did. We took the tax off of personal property, unless it's personal property held for a business purpose. So no longer do they tax your watch and your library and your furniture and all of that. Then they did away with the county paying for the welfare in the county, because we joined in on Medicaid, Medicare, or Medicaid, and the state picked it up out of severance tax revenues. So that was a tax break for people at the county level. So then we end up in a position where come 1974, in those days, the Democrats had, they weren't, let me say they weren't as anemic as we are today. And they had pretty good representation in the legislature. And they were pushing for a permanent fund. Hathaway was against it. Well, the legislature convenes, the legislative leadership comes out and says to Hathaway, look, between the Republicans who want to vote for a permanent fund and the Democrats, this thing's going to pass. So suddenly Hathaway reversed course, and in his 74 message, the legislature endorsed the permanent mineral trust fund. And the Casper Star went nuts, Stan drops a bomb, oil manager named Masterson called it an atomic bomb. And so the long and the short of it is, at the end of Hathaway's 8 years, he had adopted exactly the program that Wilkerson wanted. 1.5 for operating and 1.5 in a permanent fund. Now you gotta remember, well, you guys would remember, but as old people remember, that in that time period, the state was going nuts in terms of development. And you have to give Hathaway and his successor Hirschler for understanding markets, understanding that we were going to have a cold boom. All of the presidential administrations had committed to domestic energy by virtue of events in the Mideast, 1973 oil embargo. So they looked around and said, look, it's coming. And Hirschler got elected on a platform that essentially said, Stan wasn't aggressive enough about controlling growth. I'm in favor of growth, but I want to control it. And so he won the election in '74 and set about things like the Industrial Siting Council, expansion of the Environmental Quality Council, all of it designed built around the premise of quality of life. And that was driven by the fact that when they were building the Jim Bridger power plant, which started in '69 and then went through that sort of first half of the decade of the '70s, you literally had people living in caves because there wasn't any housing. You had lots of suicides, you had lots of, frankly, you had a lot of families with derelict, with children being essentially left aside. So all of these things came into place, premised on quality of life, how we wanted to live, and the mantra was, there'll never be another Rock Springs. And Gillette proved that, largely with the guidance of Mark, with Senator Enzi. I mean, he understood how to use those legislative endorsements to get money to build a remarkable community in the middle of nowhere that has to ship water in. I mean, it's just remarkable. So you go forward with that, but Herschel wasn't going to be outdone, so he did his own tax relief. We took the inventory tax off of cattle so that ag didn't pay anything. Hathaway had started moving ag lands from market value to productive value. That's why when you look at the real estate listings on ranch properties, you know, they'll sell for $10 million, then they'll have down here in the bottom, we pay $3,000 of state taxes because it's measured on productivity under, my wife's giving me this thing, will get moving. It's measured on productivity. She always does. You know, after 40-some years, I've gotten used to it. And if it's not her, it's my kids. But where we've ended up, this is really, I think, the message that's important to people who are here, is that Wyoming's become a great place to hold on to wealth. It's a really difficult place to build wealth. And if you look at who's moving in to different parts of the state, they're moving in because they made a killing somewhere else selling their property. They come here, they don't pay any taxes, and they get remarkable services. We as citizens pay less than 25% of the cost of the services we receive. Less than 25%. There's some significant distance from where the founding fathers wanted to be, which is you're going to pay for what you get. And I enjoy that. But it really makes no sense as public policy. And so everybody's complaining about property taxes are going up and on and on. Well, nobody's complaining about the value of their property going up. And anybody who talks to anybody from outside Wyoming, they know full well that we pay nothing compared to others. Our taxes go up in Cheyenne on our place every year now. And while I grouse about it, the truth is, I get a heck of a deal. And because we've offloaded it onto others. The other thing that it has led to is, over time, we've ended up in a position where instead of investing money in communities and trying to build a workforce, we end up saying we saved it all and we did it for the next generation. No, we're doing it for ourselves. We're fundamentally selfish about what goes forward. And I fought this when I was in office. I barely got the Hathaway Scholarship passed, and that was $500 million. The Wildlife Trust was 100 or 200. The Cultural Trust was the same kind of problem getting it funded because you had this argument, oh no, we got to save it all. Even though I did all of that, I doubled the PMTF during that time period. So the point is that if you guys care about what this state's going to be, you're going to have to get active enough that instead of taking $1.4 billion and sticking it in a sock, you split half of that and you use part of it to build communities. And I'll tell you why I think it's important. When I was chasing companies in office, and I'd go and say, we have the lowest taxes. We've had that forever as our economic development strategy. Business Council touts it, and it's useless. These companies' taxes is not what drives their decision. And I would go, and I remember I went to all of the gun manufacturers, and I'm sitting there in Connecticut, and I'm telling the guy all the great things, and we're walking around the floor while they're making weapons. He points at this guy, he says, see, if I lose that machinist, I go down the street and hire one, he'll be in the job in 3 days. I said, well, we have all kinds of job training money for you. He said, I don't train people, I hire them. And then the other thing that kept coming up over and over again is this question of livable communities. What do we have that makes people want to be here? Now, people like me were born here, I love the place. for better or worse. But when you're trying to bring businesses in, two things always are the problem. What are the communities like? And secondly, is there enough economic activity that the spouses of my employees will be able to get a job that is meaningful? And unfortunately, those answers to that were I got really good at mumbling about, opportunity and low taxes and stuff. And then I think what we've done is we have built a circumstance where we are selfishly saying, I want taxes low for me, and sort of saying the future will take care of itself. Very different than what the founding fathers envisioned. I mean, they had grand visions for this state, and we still have the mineral warehouse that we've always had, and you don't abandon that. I mean, it's really key, but it is viewed as some infidelity if you talk about anything else. And here's the reason. If you're a big company, or you're doing oil and gas, or Trona, or Bentonite, or any of those, you look at new people coming in, there's more pressure on you for paying more taxes, because you know that those people come in and they're not paying. And so you look at it, and for years the Heritage Society and other groups, they'll say some polite things about economic development, but they don't do it. And they don't do it and you can't fault them. It's not in their self-interest for there to be more people in Wyoming who are paying nothing and taking everything out. So to me, the paradigm we created has got to be broken if we're going to somehow change it. And it's going to rest with this next generation to do it, because if you look at the politics of the session, they're all talking about tax relief, started and out where I think it should be, which is on the elderly and the infirm, and manifested itself into across-the-board tax relief for everybody. As much as I like tax relief, we don't deserve it. We educate.
Unless you died. Death tax. Unless you died, death tax is killing us.
Yeah, you sound like my kids.
Yes.
I'm not ready to go yet.
Don't do it.
Anyway, all I'm saying is that there are no heroes, there are no villains in it. Book's a hard read, but it does give you a sense, because I didn't have this sense until I did all the research, and then at the encouragement of my wife, decided to write it up. Because that's when you start to see how we ended up where we are today. And I think there are ways out of it, but I don't know that there's the political will. You gotta remember, we're the first or second state most dependent on federal funding, and we're the 6th fastest aging state in the country. And so the majority of the voters are not in the demographic where they want to gain wealth. They're in a demographic where they want to hold on to what they got. My wife is back there with that look on her face, and I want to apologize to all of you that I didn't listen to her earlier. Thank you.
So, one of the themes that you touched on in your remarks tonight, and one of the quotes that I love from the book, and I'm going to paraphrase, because the sentiment exists in a quote up on the wall at the Gateway Center at Casper College, and they actually quote Governor Hathaway. He says that we come to a good place and we can make it a better place. And I think in the book you phrase that as God gave us an incredible natural environment, and it's up to us to make it livable. So the first question we wanted to put to our panel broadly, and Aaron, I wanted to start with you tonight, is really around that question of okay, we've just heard, kind of like Wile E. Coyote, we're already over the cliff, suspended in air here.
Not quite.
Well, heading that way maybe. I had to get Looney Tunes in there, forgive me. But we wanted to know, what motivates you to be here? What is that attractor? What is that quality of life component that makes this a place where you want to build your future?
I think for my husband and I and our next generation that we're raising on the ranch, the ties to the land is what keeps us here. We talk often about, we didn't really have a choice and where the ranch was located, and ranching anywhere is not easy, but ranching in Wyoming is extremely difficult. And I suppose anywhere you live, you would probably complain about the weather, but it's rough here sometimes. But we're tied to this land, and we're tied to this country, or to the beauty of the scenery, and there's also a vast openness of opportunity for us because there are so few people in the direct-to-consumer agriculture space. We get to do kind of whatever we want to do, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we'll keep trying and do something else. But we have some competition, but we don't have a lot of competition, and we don't have a lot of people thinking outside of the box, and so we can think outside the box, and people will look at it strange, and people will criticize us, but at the end of the day, we're succeeding in our little bubble that we've created, and we're finding support, and we're finding a customer base, and we're changing the ranch for the betterment of ourselves right now, and we're providing opportunities for our children. Our kids are very young, they're 12, 9, and 7. They have their whole lives in front of them to leave the ranch and to explore this world and the state, and then hopefully to come back. But I have to give them an opportunity, and I have the ability, and Mike and I have the ability together to create this opportunity. And it's because of this openness, and we all can look out the door and see the vastness of the state, and like it's for us to create and to mold into this next, what we want Wyoming to be. So that's why we stay. If the winters continue to be 60 below, maybe we'll leave.
Thanks, Erin. Just a couple of comments. Thank you, Governor Freudenthal. As someone who works in economic development and someone who's started several businesses here and continues to work in economic development, we pair the great low tax base, right? And I've got Jared coming up next, which is why I'm sort of shifting a bit. But that is not the thing that really we talk about, right? When we have folks come here, we want to talk about the mountain, the trails, the great schools, the opportunities for our family, all of the vastness and the beauty and whatever that attraction is, right? Hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, whatever that thing is. And yet we always go back to tax policy, right? Like low taxes are going to be the thing that attracts folks. Jared, do you want to comment a little bit? Same question back to you, but kind of in that framework. What motivates you and your community to want to be here? And what do you find to be what attracts people here, and what do you find is sort of the fallacy around the tax question?
Sure. So I think I maybe have a little bit of a unique opportunity, especially like during COVID and stuff like that. There were a lot of technology entrepreneurs and stuff like that were looking to get out of San Francisco. Again, San Francisco still sucks, but there's still people looking to get into that, or Portland or Seattle or something like that. And you can count on one hand of the number of like tech entrepreneurs in the state. I guess I'm on that list. So people were always reaching out to me like, hey, why should you come here? So there was probably a dozen folks that would fly to Casper or to Dragonage or whatever and meet them and bring them in. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking of moving my company here or whatever. And like question 13 is the taxes, right? Like nobody cares about. And especially now, how like the tax structure works, like if I pay state taxes, that's just like a deduction from my federal taxes, right? So it's like kind of a net zero to me. And it's especially true with a knowledge-based company, right? That I'm not buying equipment and all the rest of that stuff. So it's interesting, like the first thing they ask about is the workforce, and the second thing they ask about is can I live here, right? And how are the schools and all that kind of stuff, right? So I laugh that, no one, like, you take them down to the business council, no offense. Josh is a friend of mine, so he's here. Like, sorry, Josh, watching on video, right? But when we go, we tout that, and like it's laughable to someone who, especially in the technology industry, they don't care about any of that, right? And we built a tax structure that works exactly how it's supposed to work, right? We have one industry, we tax the fuck out of them, excuse me, and then we have like no one else. We don't tax anybody else. Right? So I'm glad there's like small wheels.
It's not a sin to cuss, Jared.
It's the arts.
But it doesn't motivate anyone, right? And I really picked up on the governor. We had like a pre-meeting a couple weeks ago. Like I really appreciate the comment you made that this is a great place to be wealthy, but it's not a great place to get wealthy, right? And I think that's, a lot of my tech friends have a place in Jackson, right? And they live there 6 months in a day, because that's how they get a good tax there, right? But they have no impact in the state, right? They fly right back to New York, and they fly right back to San Francisco, right? And that's where they do all of their work. So it's not something that is an impact us, right? And we count literally like it's like a joke that the rest of the people do that. It's unfortunate that we haven't got past that to go figure out that how do we make communities, and how do we make education, and how do we do the other stuff we need to do to actually make Wyoming in 2050 this is a place that we all want to live.
Sean, we want to ask kind of the same question to you, and obviously we know that your significant other had a hand in attracting you to this state, but I know that when we talk about attraction for business attraction and quality of life attraction to the Sheridan County area, you guys are kind of at capacity, which means you maybe figured out some things. You might be moving to like 2.0 and some of that diversification and attraction, but what would you summarize as kind of the quality of life and the reasons for being here?
Sure, I mean, yeah, I love this question because I get asked my mom asks me this every week. What are you doing in Wyoming? Come home. This enough is enough. You've had your fun. Get back to the city. But I mean, one, the quality of life stuff is easy. It's Sheridan County. It's spectacular. It's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, sure, we complain about the housing, but I grew up in Toronto, so I mean, I'm still feeling the tax break 13 years later. But really, honestly, the motivation for me is the ability to affect change at every level of the community and affect real change, not just pay lip service. Governor, you mentioned the firearms companies and the push and the messaging. And I go back to the prior director of the Business Council, Sean Reese, and I remember sitting in my office one day and I get this phone call, and Sean, he says, "Hey, this is either the stupidest idea I've ever had or the best idea I've ever had, but you've got a company coming in today, and you're going to get half an hour with them, and you're going to sell them on Sheridan. And I'm not going to tell you who it is." I'm like, I mean, he knows me. He knew I would have told everybody in 15 minutes if he had told me what it was. So I get told that they're looking at this parcel in the business park. I need to impress them. So I'm like, well, what the heck do I do out in the Sheridan Business Park by the interstate? So I got this table and I filled it with Blacktooth beer and Luminous beer and wine and whiskey and everything I could think of. And I got these specs for a company's building that I didn't know who it was going to be. And I propped it up like I was, in a 1980s movie with a boombox on my shoulder playing some local music. And out strolled Adam and Brenda Weatherby. And I go, oh, this is kind of cool. I know who these guys are. This is great. And they're on their big roadshow around the state. They're second of the 4 visits that day. And they come out and I do my 30-minute pitch and some deer run across and like, did you let those out? I said, totally, I 100% did. The bison are coming, but you guys will be back on the plane, so you will miss that. But they said, great, we like the pitch, and they're pretty stone-faced because they're being courted by everybody. Wyoming was just one of their 4 states they were going to. Idaho was next, and they'd been to South Dakota, North Dakota. We knew a few things. We knew that Ed Weatherby had come in 1989, and they had pitched the hell out of him based on taxes. And they know that. They stayed in California for 30 more years, knowing full well that anywhere they went to in this country or any other one was a tax break waiting to happen. So I didn't talk about taxes, 1, because I don't know anything about them, and 2, because the only thing I care about is lifestyle and why I choose to live there. And my wife was pregnant with twins at the time. This is 2018. And they asked me, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I love it. I mean, I leave work and I go hiking in 15 minutes and I don't see another person on the trail. I can fly out of an airport that takes 10 minutes to get through security if I have to travel internationally. I mean, there's things I love about it. And it's beautiful. My office sits there looking at the mountains. Look where your office would be. You're not down in Paso Robles, California, looking at an industrial smokestack. They said thanks, and we've been out to a wine bar downtown, and we're sitting around, and we're going, how did it go? I'm like, I don't know. I've never pitched a gun company. I'm Canadian. And we thought they were back on the state plane, and we see these 2 walk by, and I said, that's no way, that's them. So I ran out and I said, hey, what are you guys doing? They said, well, we thought we'd stay a night. Just check Sheridan out a little bit further. I said, well, where are you going? They said, we're going to go to Fractals. And I said, you can't get in there. It's very exclusive, but we have a reservation. I just bullshitted. I'm sure they could have easily walked in. But they came with us, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, we stumbled out of the speakeasy in town, and we sat in the rocking chairs in the Sheridan. And they said, we're really not supposed to say anything because we've got all these other tours to go on, but Sheridan's where it's at for us. And it's based on lifestyle. That was the only thing they cared about. They were worried about the staffing. They were really concerned about that, so we sent a team together. My wife, it was really funny, I was gonna go, and my wife was gonna be like, have the babies within like 2 days, and she said, you could go straight back to Canada if you go on that trip. But we sent a contingent out to California to pitch to the staff. There was 90 people at the time, and we pitched again on life stuff. We were pretty lucky, we brought 20 people. We thought that was a huge win, and Weatherby said, we made the worst decision we could think of. The company's going under, there's no way we can recruit enough staff in the state of Wyoming with the needs that we have to continue this business. So we worked with them on a package to market nationally, and we were pretty excited. In the week we opened up that application for everybody from their number 2 senior VP all the way down to their most junior employees. We received 3,500 applicants from every state and every province in Canada to move to and work in Sheridan, Wyoming, and we didn't once mention the taxes. So, lifestyle's been a pretty good hook for us in Sheridan since 2017 when this stuff started. That's how we've really helped expand a lot of the good things that are going on there. So sorry, that was longer than 2 minutes, but that's our pitch.
That was excellent, thank you. Kayla, I think Laramie just won a national award for Main Street. Anyone who has experienced that, I call it front country, that authentic small town experience knows what quality of life can be here. What do you see in response to this question as kind of the attractors? What keeps you here and with your constituents?
Yeah, so we've had several of our Wyoming communities win that Great American Main Street Award. It's the national award, which I think really touts how great our communities are. Not only the people that are involved with them, what Sean didn't say is that those folks from Weatherby went to all those places downtown Sheridan, right? Which is a really cool testament to just how important our downtowns are, and that they really are in the heart of the community. And I think that, you've heard here today about businesses really taking into consideration their impressions of a community when they first come in, and downtown is the first place that they start. And so if your community, your residents don't have pride in your downtown, and they're not cleaning up the streets, there aren't businesses locally being started or run, and doors aren't open, then it's not a good sign for your town, whether you're a visitor driving through or you're a business looking to relocate. They want to see that the residents here in Wyoming really do care for their community and have pride and passion to invest their time and their money and their energy into bringing life. And so I think for me, what motivates me to continue to do this work is hearing those stories of successful business owners, hearing stories like Sean, and bringing larger businesses in too, because I think both are important. But none of that work really happens without investment from not only the community as a whole, but just volunteer time to do cleanup on the streets and to volunteer at that summer event and to have a group that's really responsible to own that downtown and that program.
Wonderful, thank you. We're gonna do one more round, time for final thoughts, or whatever you'd like to talk about in the last opportunity. But I'd like to touch on something first that the governor mentioned, and it's prevalent. We all talk about the tax policy not being the issue why people want to come here. It's the amenities, right, which are public goods. So the point about, do we continue to stockpile money for future generations? And as a mom of 6, 4th generation kiddos, I get
Sorry,
that.
did you say 6?
6,
Oh my
yeah. I had a third of my kids here for a while. We're trying to populate the state by ourselves, which is. But I do look at that and say, this is responsible behavior, right? We're all parents or, interested in the youth in our state. And so, things like the Hathaway, which educates our kids, our great public schools, our universities, just really show how much we care about those things. But the pushback, you mentioned legislatively, right, the need to save and to cut taxes and to not spend, the upside downness of people wanting to come here because of public amenities, which require money, public dollars, versus the need to sort of stockpile and, not be concerned about what the, what our state looks like. I think just the the unbalancedness of that. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit and appreciate everyone's comments on that. And then we'll go ahead, we're gonna start with Kayla first, and we'll go back that way. And then we will have the governor follow up with any final thoughts he's got. Again, you can, if you've got some final thoughts on where to go from here, or, whatever topic you'd like to spend your last comments on.
Sure, well, thank you. I think I just want to touch a little bit on, continuing with that theme of, I think Main Street is used to doing more with less, and a lot of the time, less is less money. And really leveraging community resources like the people, or maybe it's the generosity of having a small town network where everybody knows everybody, and going to the hardware store and getting a donation for your project to set up your concert. Or maybe it's just the generosity of just that personal connection. And I think just going in line with, we're not gonna, I guess with the current theme of things, money isn't going to be flowing not only to Main Street programs, but some of these other industries and the representation that these folks have up here. And so I think my closing thoughts is really just for all of you, as you go back to your homes and your own communities, to really think about how you can give back in ways other than financially, to your downtowns and to your communities at large, whether you have a Main Street program in your community or another community organization that you can give back to in some way. I would encourage you to think about non-financial ways that you can contribute.
This might sound insane coming from the tourism director of popular tourism destination and Governor Gordon's newest appointee to the tourism board, but one thing I try and beat our community over the head with and try and make everybody remember is never cater to tourists. Never. Cater only and care about only the people in our community. When people come to me and say, hey, do we want to build a theme park with the historic Sheridan Inn at the center to fleece tourists of their money, to watch to come to a chuck wagon cook-off and see an old-timey village? I say, absolutely not. To paraphrase Chris Pratt, my favorite actor, that's a wonderful idea and I hate it. If you cater to tourists, you will get nothing but tourists. If we cater to locals, we will get nothing but local involvement. And one of the things I was told I had to talk about today was the story from my early days. 2016, I've been on the job about 6 months, and I leveraged some old contacts. Or reached out to the folks at Rolls-Royce, who I had done some jobs with in the East Coast, and I said, hey, what about bringing a bunch of people out, a bunch of media, to do some local art stuff? We'll go to the Brinton Museum, we'll do our artist retreat at U-Cross, we'll do the stuff that really shows off some of the higher end art in our community, the real Rolls Royces kind of stuff. I mean, I'm just lying to them at this point, right? You get them on a call, you tell them anything they want to hear. So I figured they'd send one car and maybe one or two media, and they ended up sending us 8 cars. They decided they'd bring Piper Air too, and they did this whole thing. They spent $500,000 to debut a new car in Sheridan. They brought out 15 journalists. I mean, this was a huge deal, big deal for me at the time. 6 months into this job, I went, oh yeah, we can totally do this. I had no idea if we could do this, but it was great. It was wonderful because it was all about showing off what locals do. It wasn't going and saying, hey, this is the cool hotel by the interstate that people can stay in for one night before they go to Yellowstone. No, this was looking at Eden's Ranch, the oldest dude ranch in the country. This was talking about the history of polo developed at Canyon Ranch. I mean, it was really ingraining, showing off what's ingrained in our community, what's special about it. And it went really great, and I was showing off this great community up by the Brinton, and I'm driving one of these cars on a test drive one night, and everything was going amazing until I hit a deer going 110 miles an hour. And that put a really quick end to that evening. But I remember getting out of the car, and I'm there with the media, and the mayor drives by in one of the other ones, shaking his head going, looking at this $400,000 car now with $150,000 damage done to the front end. And I thought, my career's over. This is the end. This is ruined. Media's gonna eviscerate us. It's all finished. I'm on the first plane back to Canada. And I get a phone call from the CEO of Rolls-Royce, and he says, are you guys okay? I said, yeah. He goes, are the journalists okay? I said, yeah. He goes, good. I'll call you tomorrow. I'm at the Dodgers game. Don't bug me again. He didn't care because they were having a great time. That was a write-off. They've come back to Wyoming 2 more times since that event because we've shown them exceptional experience that they don't get anywhere else. You know, they do touristy stuff, they do these things all over the world. That year, they did Johannesburg, London, and Sheridan for their big media meals. And I'm really proud of that kind of thing, because again, it's on about the lifestyle and the culture, not the drive from the Black Hills to Yellowstone.
One of the most remarkable Airbnb reviews that we've ever received was, "Do not arrive after dark, there's a lot of deer on the highway." And they gave us 1 star. Because I can control deer on the highway. But anyhow, tourists are interesting, and we started to encounter them in 2019 when we opened up the ranch to tourists. I think one of the biggest things that we try and do on an annual basis, on a daily basis sometimes, is we look at our operation and we look at the future of where we want to go, and sometimes we say, why can't we do this, or why aren't we doing this already? And we just try and think about, what are our needs today, what are our needs in the future, and how do we connect the two? And it doesn't have to be what we've always done in the past. Agriculture is so tied to that. This is how we've always done it, this is how Grandpa did it, this is how Dad did it. We can't do it that way anymore. The traditional cow-calf operation in Wyoming is struggling. And looks like cattle prices are going up, that's great, but it's been a rough 10 years. If you're a traditional agriculture in operation. We have to think differently. We have to think outside the box. We say it all the time, but we actually have to start doing it. And taxes are going to be a big part of it. I don't know anything about taxes. That's not my wheelhouse. I don't want my 6 turkeys taxed though, but like I can pay some more taxes. It's okay. When we tell our friends, we've met people from all over the United States, all over the world because of our social media outreach. When I tell my friend that lives outside of Seattle what our property taxes are on ranch land and, you know, huge spaces of land, and compared to what they pay for their city lot and, you know, and outside of Seattle, they are astonished. And it's like, yeah, it's laughable. I'll keep my taxes, thank you very much. You know, we have to do more. We all benefit from the state and from our communities, and we're not putting back into them at the same rate that we should be. In my nonprofit space, you know, I give local food to people for free. And you hear all the time, well, there's abuse of the welfare system, and why do you give it to them, and do they hoard food and they take too much? And who cares? Like, let's just prop each other up and let's make our communities better, and let's produce food and let's produce product in Wyoming. I would love for our agriculture commodities to stay in the state rather than to be an export. We have protein, like literally just running. You know, I saw turkey on the way here on Second Street. We've got protein everywhere, but no one's consuming. It's hard to consume Wyoming protein. It's not in our grocery stores. It's not in our school district. It's you know, you have to seek out a farmer or a rancher, and it doesn't have to be that way. We need to start thinking, why not, or why aren't we doing this, and to start to put that infrastructure in place and the tax structure to support our communities and the next generation. And diversity of jobs would be so great. I want my kids to have, we talk about it a lot with our kids about like, maybe you can run this component of the business, because we have multiple revenue streams and multiple things going on a daily basis. So, you know, hey, let's grow the farm store and let's create a shipping warehouse, and maybe you can step in and take care of this, and we're doing an acre of vegetables, and maybe by the time our kids come back, it'll be 10 acres of vegetables. And diversity within our little bubble, there's job potential there, and it's just about growing that and strengthening that. But I need the support industries to go with it also. And young people and youth that want to stay in the state. So I think we can do it. We have to.
Thanks. So just to kind of think about a handful of the conversations, it kind of takes you back to a phrase, how I try to describe Wyoming. And it's, in Wyoming, we are hunters and we are not farmers. And I think that's actually kind of true, but what I mean by it is we really look for instant gratification, and we don't do long-term investment, right? And if you look at like other natural resource heavy states, if you look at the guys in North Dakota, or if you look our friends in Idaho, or you look at our friends in Nebraska, they're farmers, they're all farmers, right? But they invest and they understand that it's gonna take years for things to happen, right? And if you look at what it's gonna take here to get our young people to wanna come back, it takes that long-term vision, and we need to be able to invest today for something that's not gonna give us something tomorrow. It's gonna give us something next year, or the year after that, or the year after that, right? And we make easy decisions, and the legislature makes easy decisions. It's really easy to put $1.4 billion in the bank, right? Because everyone likes that, they like it tomorrow, right? But if you put that somewhere else and invest in our communities, and you're able to, you get that back next year, the year after that. And I'm hoping that when you look at kind of the younger generation coming up and the folks, the Gen Z and what they care about, I'm hoping we start to get an idea and a thought of like, let's not just pull that black stuff out of the ground tomorrow and get the instant gratification. We start to invest in our communities and look at what next year, the year after that looks like for Wyoming.
Great, thank you. Thanks to all of our panelists here. Really appreciate y'all attending. We're gonna let the governor give his concluding remarks, and then we'll be done for the evening. Thanks for all of you for attending.
Well, I'm actually optimistic about the state, because you see people like this panel who are sort of trying to think outside the box. And I think there are a couple of things that have to be done. Legislature, and I did it as governor, complain about local governments coming hand in hand to the state. They don't have any choice. We haven't changed the mill levies they can levy since statehood. We've reduced their tax base to probably, I don't know, 10, 12% of what it used to be, unless you're in Mineral County. The legislature has passed legislation that doesn't allow communities to impose any additional sales tax without the permission of the legislature. They passed laws that say you can't no local governments can do any tax or any form of fee that is based on income. So we've crippled them. And we sit here talking about they're the vehicle for moving forward. But, cars run on gasoline or electricity, or whatever they run on, but there has to be the fuel. And the fuel to build these communities is not just our being interested, it's money. And if we don't do that, and right now, we're living on infrastructure that was primarily funded, a lot of it was built in the 70s, some of it in the 90s, and we've had an infusion of cash, about $4 billion of COVID-related money, another couple billion in infrastructure money that's going to be flowing into the state. So we've been able to deceive ourselves that all is well, and we've not taken what you're talking about, which is what is the longer view. If you think about how we handle our own family budget, we do what we have to do to keep the family moving and expanding, but what you can do for your kids. And then you save some. You don't just save it all and say, as to you guys, good luck. The other thing that's happened by virtue of the way we've treated local jurisdictions is we've got all of these special districts now. You got museum districts, you got sewer districts, you got water districts, you got conservation districts. In 1988, there were 388 special districts. I don't know what the number is now. They exist outside of the county and city framework because they're not held to the constitutional mill levies that apply to them. And that includes community colleges. So you end up, although the legislature's limited how much they can tax. I think if we can change how we look at things to how do we build for tomorrow, understanding that, that may cost us today. We have children who live in Seattle. I wouldn't pay their taxes on a bed. I mean, I want to whine about mine. I get no sympathy from our kids. They're, sort of, give us a break. So what I think, and I don't know whether it can be done, given the nature of politics in Wyoming right now, where it's all about power and what's in it for me, we have to change that. What's in it for future generations. Doesn't mean we abandon taking care of us old people, because we won't need it. But we got to recognize that structurally, we have created a circumstance where the next generation is an afterthought. It's not a current thought. And until we change that, and that's gonna mean a bunch of you guys gotta get into politics, because the fundamental operation of the functions that build communities are governmental. You know, if you can have the greatest people in the world, and if you got a sewer system that was built in 1969, nobody's coming there. If, you know, if they flush the toilet in the restaurant that doesn't work, you know, there's a clue. So I guess what I'm saying is I think Wyoming has such a great place. It has great people, but we have to stop handicapping the next generation by taking the focus off of us and onto them. And that's the remarkable thing that both Hathaway and Hershey did. They saw where markets were going, and they said, we get it. Coal, big deal, and it has been a huge deal. And minerals is going to remain a big part of what the state is. But if you follow markets, yeah, we're generating a lot of electricity with wind farms. If you notice, there's not a single parking lot around a wind farm. And that should tell you how many people they employ. And it's just the future is going to be different. And we're sitting here longing for the past, and the past has some instructions for you. Now, this book is a hard book to read because it was written by a lawyer who was an economics major in his undergraduate and who swore at the outset I wasn't going to tell all the stories I know about all of the political figures of the state. That would be interesting, but not right. But anyway, take a look at it. But I do think you cannot think about the future of this state without thinking about how you're going to fund it. And if we don't take a step up and say we're going to fund it, it ain't going to happen. Thank you.
On behalf of Wyoming Arts Alliance, thanks to everyone who came out to the NIC tonight. It's this building's 100-year anniversary. We've been in it since 1990, and today is International Museum Day. So on behalf of the Alliance, happy International Museum Day. Thank you all for watching online. If you're interested, we are member supported. You can become a member at wyomingarts.org, and that will enable us to continue having fantastic Wyoming authors and incredible thought leaders and creative folks coming together to think about the future. So I want to give one more thanks to my partner in crime tonight, Joanne True, for making this possible with us, and to everyone else who came together from all over the state to share your insights. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.